Captain Jake Murphy stared out the window of the UES Venture as they approached the edge of known space. The stars looked different here, somehow colder and more distant. His ship had been traveling for 3 months to reach this point, following strange signals that Earth's deep space listening posts had picked up. "Captain, we're getting those signals again," said Lisa Rodriguez from her station. She was the ship's communications officer, a young woman with dark hair who had joined the crew fresh from the academy. "They're definitely artificial. Someone is out here." Jake nodded and walked over to her console. The signals were unlike anything humans had ever heard before. They came in perfect patterns, mathematical and precise, with no variation or background noise. It was as if whoever was sending them had removed every trace of randomness from their transmissions. "Any luck figuring out what they mean?" Jake asked. Lisa shook her head. "I've run them through every translation program we have. The patterns are too perfect. It's like they're speaking in pure mathematics." Ben Carter looked up from the engine controls where he was working. He was a cheerful man in his 30s, who always seemed to find something funny in any situation. "Maybe they're rare. Just really boring," he said with a grin. "Some aliens probably take themselves way too seriously." Amy Thompson, the science officer, turned from her instruments. She was a quiet woman who spent most of her time studying data, but she had sharp eyes that missed nothing. "The signals are getting stronger. We should be able to see their ships soon." Jake returned to his captain's chair and pressed the ship-wide communication button. "All hands, this is the captain. We're about to make first contact with an alien species. Remember your training and follow standard protocols. This is what we've all been working toward." The crew had trained for this moment for years. Every human ship that ventured into deep space carried the same hope that they might be the ones to finally meet another intelligent species. Earth had been listening to the stars for centuries, but this was the first time they had found clear proof that someone was listening back. "Contact on sensors," Amy announced. 3 ships, large ones. They're moving toward us in perfect formation. Jake watched the main screen as 3 massive vessels appeared in the distance. They were unlike any human ship he had ever seen. Instead of the practical, functional design of human spacecraft, these ships looked like they had been carved from single pieces of dark crystal. They moved with impossible smoothness, as if they were floating through water instead of space. "Open a channel," Jake ordered. Lisa worked at her console for several minutes before shaking her head. "They're not responding to any of our standard greeting frequencies, but they are scanning us. I can feel their sensors running over our ship." The alien ships maintained their formation as they approached. Jake could see now that they were enormous, each one at least twice the size of his ship. Strange lights flickered along their surfaces in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Captain," Amy said quietly, "I'm reading some kind of energy buildup from the lead ship. I think they're preparing to communicate." The main screen suddenly filled with an image that made everyone on the bridge go silent. The alien that appeared before them was tall and thin, with skin that looked like it was made of polished crystal. Its face was long and narrow, with large eyes that held no expression at all. When it spoke, its voice came through the speakers as a series of musical tones that somehow formed words. "Unknown vessel," the alien said, its voice perfectly controlled and emotionless. "You have entered the territory of the Valderon Empire. State your identity and purpose." Jake stood up and straightened his uniform. This was the moment that would determine humanity's future relationship with the galaxy. "I am Captain Jake Murphy of the Earthship UES Venture. We come in peace, seeking contact and friendship with other intelligent species." The alien's expression did not change at all. "I am Admiral Zeth Kalar of the Imperial Border Guard. Your presence here was not authorized. You will accompany us to our command ship for evaluation. We would be honored, Jake replied, trying to match the alien's formal tone. The transfer to the Valderon ship took place in complete silence. Jake brought Lisa, Ben, and Amy with him, figuring that a small group would seem less threatening than a large delegation. As they walked through the airlock connecting the two ships, Jake noticed that everything was perfectly clean and organized. There were no personal touches anywhere, no decorations or signs that individual beings lived and worked here. The corridors of the Valderon ship were wide and tall, clearly built for beings larger than humans. The walls were made of the same crystal-like material as the ship's exterior, and they seemed to glow with their own inner light. Jake's footsteps echoed strangely in the empty hallways, as if the sound was being absorbed and changed by the crystal around them. Admiral Zeth Kalar led them to a large chamber that appeared to be some kind of meeting room. The ceiling was so high that Jake could barely see it in the dim light. Around the walls stood other Valderon beings, all of them perfectly still and silent. They watched the humans with large, unblinking eyes. You will stand in the center of the chamber, Admiral Zeth Kalar instructed. Do not move or speak unless given permission. Jake exchanged a quick glance with his crew. This was not going the way he had hoped. The Valderons seemed more interested in studying them like specimens than in having a conversation. For several minutes, nothing happened. The Valderons simply stood and stared, occasionally making soft musical sounds to each other. Jake began to feel uncomfortable under their unblinking gaze. He had expected first contact to involve more talking and less silent observation. Ben Carter shifted his weight from one foot to the other and looked around the chamber. His eyes fell on a tall crystal structure near one wall that seemed to be some kind of artistic display. It was beautiful, with complex geometric patterns that caught and reflected the light from the wall's dot as Ben took a step to get a better look at the crystal display. His foot caught on something on the floor. He stumbled forward, throwing out his hands to keep from falling. His shoulder bumped into the crystal structure, which rang out like a bell when he touched it. "Oh, sorry about that," Ben said automatically, and without thinking, he let out a small chuckle at his own clumsiness. The sound of Ben's laugh echoed through the silent chamber like a thunderclap. Every Valderon in the room froze completely, their large eyes widening in what looked like shock or horror. Admiral Zeth Kalar took a step backward, his crystal-like skin changing color from pale blue to deep purple. The silence that followed seemed to press down on the humans like a physical weight. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in his ears as he waited for someone to speak. He looked at Ben, who had gone pale as he realized that something had gone very wrong. "What?" Admiral Zeth Kalar said slowly, his musical voice now carrying undertones that sounded almost like fear. "Was that sound?" Jake cleared his throat. "My engineer was just expressing amusement at his own mistake. It's a normal human response. We call it laughter." The color of Admiral Zeth Kalar's skin shifted to an even deeper purple. He looked at the other Valderons in the room, and Jake could see them communicating with small musical sounds that were too quiet for the translation equipment to pick up. "This meeting is concluded," Admiral Zeth Kalar announced suddenly. "You will return to your vessel immediately. Do not attempt to follow us or make contact again until you have learned proper civilized behavior." Before Jake could ask what he meant, the humans were being escorted back to their ship by silent Valderon guards. Within minutes, the UES Venture was alone in space again, watching the three crystal ships disappear into the distance. "What just happened?" Lisa asked as they stood on the bridge, trying to make sense of the encounter. Jake shook his head. "I have no idea. But I think Ben's laugh just caused some kind of diplomatic incident. Ben looked miserable." "I didn't mean." to do anything wrong. I just stumbled and thought it was funny." Amy was already at her station, analyzing the recordings of the meeting. There's something strange about the reaction. It wasn't anger or offense. It was more like fear. Jake sat down in his captain's chair and stared out at the empty space where the Valderon ships had been. Humanity's first contact with an alien species had lasted less than an hour, and somehow they had managed to offend them without understanding how or why. "Set course for Earth," he said finally. "We need to report this and figure out what we did wrong." As the UE's venture turned toward home, none of them realized that Ben's simple laugh had just triggered a crisis that would shake the foundations of the galaxy's oldest and most powerful empire. Admiral Zeth Kalar stood in the command center of his flagship, watching the human vessel disappear into the distance. His crystalline skin still showed the deep purple coloration of extreme distress, and his fellow officers maintained a respectful distance from him. The sound he had heard in the meeting chamber continued to echo in his mind like a poison. "Send an immediate priority message to the High Council," he ordered his communications officer. "Classification level: extreme threat to Imperial stability." The message that traveled across Valderon space that day would change everything. It spoke of creatures that could produce chaotic sound waves capable of disrupting the mental equilibrium of civilized beings. The report described the humans as possessing what appeared to be a biological weapon that attacked through auditory channels, causing involuntary emotional responses in its victims. On the Valderon homeworld of Kethmorin, the Council of Eternal Silence received Admiral Zeth Kalar's report with growing alarm. The council chamber was a massive dome of pure white crystal, where the Empire's leaders had met in perfect quiet for over 3,000 years. The only sounds ever heard, there were the formal harmonic tones used for official communication. "High." Magistrate Velthara read the report aloud to the assembled council, her voice carrying the controlled musical tones that marked her high rank. As she described the incident with a laughing human, several council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The very idea of uncontrolled sound being produced for no logical purpose was deeply disturbing to them. "This confirms our worst fears about the chaotic species beyond our borders," Velthara announced. "We have always known that uncivilized beings pose a threat to our ordered society, but this goes beyond anything we have encountered before." Counselor Nethvor, an ancient Valderon whose crystal skin had turned almost black with age, raised his hand to speak. "The sound described in this report represents a fundamental threat to everything we have built. If this laughter can spread from being to being, it could destroy our entire civilization." The council voted unanimously to classify humanity as a Class 7 cognitive hazard, the highest threat level in Valderon law. All contact with human space was forbidden, and emergency protocols were put into place to prevent any accidental exposure to human communication signals. Meanwhile, the UES Venture was making its way back toward Earth, its crew still puzzled by their reception. Captain Jake Murphy had spent hours reviewing the recordings of their encounter, trying to understand what had gone so wrong. "There has to be something we're missing," he said to Dr. Greg Foster, a xenopsychologist who had joined them at the last starbase before their return journey. Dr. Foster was a thoughtful man in his 50s who specialized in understanding alien cultures and behaviors. Dr. Foster studied the images of the Valderon ship and its crew with great interest. "Look at their body language," he said, pointing to the screen. "Every movement is controlled and deliberate. There's no spontaneous action at all. It's like they've trained themselves to suppress any natural impulses." Lisa Rodriguez was monitoring communication channels as they traveled, hoping to pick up more Valderon signals. What she found instead was deeply troubling. "Captain, you need to hear this," she said. "I'm intercepting Valderon transmissions. and they're talking about us. The translation program had improved since their first encounter, and now they could understand more of the Valderon language. What they heard made Jake's blood run cold. The Valderons were describing humans as carriers of a mental disease that could spread through sound. They were warning other species about the danger humanity represented. They think we're some kind of biological weapon, Amy Thompson said in disbelief. They actually believe that laughter is dangerous. Ben Carter sat quietly at his station, still feeling guilty about causing the incident. I don't understand how a laugh can be threatening. It's the most natural thing in the world. Dr. Foster was taking notes as he listened to more intercepted transmissions. This is fascinating, he said. Their entire society appears to be built around the suppression of emotional expression. To them, spontaneous behavior like laughter must seem completely alien and frightening. The situation became even more complicated 3 days later when another human ship encountered Valderon forces. Captain Rita Barnes was commanding the exploration vessel, UES Discovery, when her crew detected a lone Valderon science ship conducting research near a gas giant. Captain Barnes was an experienced officer who had read the reports from the UES Venture encounter. She approached the situation carefully, using only formal communication protocols and keeping her crew on strict behavioral guidelines. The meeting took place via video communication, with both captains remaining on their respective ships. Captain Barnes introduced herself and her crew with the utmost formality, copying the speech patterns that the UES Venture crew had observed. The Valderon captain, Cole Fess, seemed willing to engage in limited communication. For nearly an hour, the two ships maintained a careful dialogue about scientific research and navigation rights in the sector. Everything was going well until Tony Walsh, the Discovery's pilot, made a casual comment about the Valderon's elaborate speech patterns. "Boy, these guys sure do like their fancy words," he said quietly to his crewmate, not realizing that his microphone was still active. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Captain Colthis and his entire visible crew went rigid, their crystal skin flashing through multiple colors in rapid succession. The Valderon captain began making high-pitched harmonic sounds that the translation system could not interpret. "We are contaminated," Captain Colthis finally managed to say, his usual perfect composure completely shattered. Emergency withdrawal protocols initiated. All crew to decontamination chambers. The Valderon ship fled the scene immediately, transmitting what could only be described as a distress call on all frequencies. Within hours, Valderon emergency response teams were broadcasting warnings throughout their space about a second human attack using sonic weapons. When Captain Barnes reported the incident to Earth Command, the full scope of the crisis became clear. Humanity had somehow become viewed as a biological threat by one of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. And the situation was getting worse with each contact. Dr. Foster worked frantically to understand the Valderon mindset. He studied every piece of intercepted communication, looking for clues about their psychology and social structure. What he discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. They've created a society based on absolute emotional control, he explained to Captain Murphy during a conference call between the two ships. For thousands of years, they've been suppressing every natural impulse toward spontaneous expression. They've convinced themselves that emotional chaos is a disease that can literally infect other beings. But that's impossible, Lisa said. Laughter isn't contagious in a biological sense. Not to us, Dr. Foster replied, but to a species that has spent millennia suppressing their emotions. Exposure to uncontrolled human behavior might actually cause psychological disruption. We represent everything they've been taught to fear. The implications were staggering. If the Valderons truly believed that humans carried some kind of mental plague, they would take extreme measures to protect themselves and others. Already, reports were coming in of Valderon ships Warning other alien species about the human threat, Captain Murphy found himself at the center of an intergalactic incident that no one had ever imagined possible. Earth's first contact with an alien civilization had turned into a nightmare scenario where humanity's most basic social behaviors were seen as acts of war. What do we do now? Amy asked during one of their planning sessions. Dr. Foster looked up from his research with a grim expression. We figure out how to convince a species that has forgotten how to laugh that laughter isn't actually dangerous. And we better do it quickly, because if this escalates much further, we could be looking at a war that started over a chuckle. Back in Valderon space, the crisis was deepening by the hour. Emperor Krolthanos himself had been informed of the human threat, and emergency sessions were being held at the highest levels of government. Military commanders were being briefed on the possibility of facing an enemy that could disable Valderon forces using weapons that attacked the mind itself. The empire that had ruled the galaxy through order and discipline was about to face its greatest challenge yet, and they had no idea that the threat they feared so much was actually humanity's greatest gift to the universe. Emperor Krolthanos stood in the highest tower of the imperial palace, looking out over the crystal spires of his capital city. For 1,200 years, he had ruled the Valderon Empire with absolute authority, maintaining the sacred order that had brought peace and stability to countless worlds. Now, for the first time in his long reign, he faced a threat that he did not understand. The reports from the border regions grew more disturbing each day. 2 separate encounters with human vessels had resulted in what military analysts were calling cognitive warfare attacks. The humans appeared to possess some kind of biological weapon that could disable Valderon crews through auditory assault, leaving them confused and emotionally unstable. "Show me the recordings again," Emperor Krolthanos commanded his chief advisor, Minister Vel Karn. The holographic display filled the center of the throne room with images from Admiral Zethkalar's encounter. The Emperor watched in silence as the human called Ben Carter produced the terrible sound that had disrupted an entire ship's crew. The noise itself had been filtered and dampened for safety, but even the reduced version made the Emperor's crystal skin shift to an uncomfortable pale yellow. "How many of our people have been exposed to this weapon?" the Emperor asked. 47 individuals across both incidents," Minister Velkarn replied. "All have been placed in isolation chambers for observation. The medical staff reports that they are experiencing involuntary emotional fluctuations and decreased control over their harmonic frequencies." Emperor Krolthanos felt his skin darken to deep purple. The symptoms described were exactly what the ancient texts warned about, the signs of cognitive chaos that could destroy a civilized mind. The humans had somehow weaponized the very disorder that Valderon society had spent millennia learning to suppress. "Mobilize the First Fleet," the Emperor ordered. "Establish a security perimeter around all human-controlled systems. No vessel is to approach within 50 light years of their space without imperial authorization." The command went out across the Empire within hours. The Valderon First Fleet was the largest military force in known space, consisting of over 3,000 vessels and their support ships. As the massive fleet moved toward human space, panic began to spread among the civilian populations of nearby systems. Captain Jake Murphy received the news while the UES Venture was still 2 weeks away from Earth. The long-range sensors showed a wall of Valderon ships taking position around human space, effectively cutting off all access to the rest of the galaxy. "They're treating us like we're carrying the plague," Dr. Foster said as he studied the fleet positions. "This has gone far beyond a simple diplomatic misunderstanding." The situation became even more tense when Earth Command ordered all human exploration ships to return to Earth immediately. Captain Murphy found himself leading a convoy of 12 vessels as they tried to navigate through the Valderon blockade. "This is Admiral Zeth Kalar of the Valderon Imperial Fleet," came the transmission as they approached the perimeter. "Human vessels are forbidden to leave the contamination zone. Return to your point of origin immediately." Captain Murphy activated the communication system. "Admiral, this is Captain Murphy. We request permission to pass through your space peacefully. We mean no harm to your people." "Your presence is the harm," Admiral Zeth Kalar replied. "You carry weapons that attack the mind itself. We cannot allow you to spread this infection to innocent populations." Dr. Foster stepped forward. "Admiral, may I speak with you? I believe there has been a serious misunderstanding about human behavior." There was a long pause before Admiral Zeth Kalar responded. "You may transmit your message, but maintain your distance. Any attempt to use your sonic weapons will result in immediate defensive action." Dr. Foster took a deep breath and activated the video communication system. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, studying everything they knew about Valderon psychology and culture. "Admiral, what you witnessed from our crew member was not a weapon. It was a natural emotional response that humans call laughter. We produce this sound when we find something amusing or when we are happy. It is not designed to harm anyone." "Admiral." Zeth Kalar's image appeared on the screen, his crystal features showing the same controlled composure as before. "You claim this laughter is natural behavior?" "Yes," Dr. Foster said. "All humans do it. Children learn to laugh before they can even speak properly. It is one of our most basic social behaviors." The Admiral's skin shifted to a darker shade. "You are telling me that your entire species is naturally infected with cognitive chaos? That you willingly produce these disruptive sounds as part of normal social interaction?" Dr. Foster realized that his explanation was making things worse, not better. To the Valderons, the idea that humans naturally engaged in chaotic behavior was even more frightening than the possibility that they had developed it as a weapon. "It's not chaos," Dr. Foster tried to explain. "Laughter brings us together. It helps us bond with each other and cope with difficult situations. It's actually very important for our mental health." Admiral Zeth Kalar stood up abruptly. "You admit that this behavior affects mental states. You confirm that it spreads between individuals through auditory exposure. This is biological warfare, whether you intended it as such or not." The communication channel closed, and the human ships found themselves trapped between the Valderon fleet and the edge of their own space. Captain Murphy called an emergency meeting of all the ship captains in the convoy. "We're dealing with a species that has completely different ideas about what normal behavior looks like," he explained to the group. "They see our laughter as a threat because they've suppressed their own emotions for so long that they've forgotten what natural expression looks like." Captain Rita Barnes, who had joined the convoy after her own encounter with the Valderons, spoke up. "The question is, what do we do about it? We can't stop being human just to make them comfortable." The answer came sooner than anyone expected. Lieutenant Kate Nelson was working on the communication equipment aboard the UES Venture when she accidentally activated an open channel to the Valderon fleet. At that exact moment, she was listening to a recording that Dr. Foster had made of different types of human laughter for his research. The sound of children giggling and adults chuckling filled the communication channel, broadcasting directly to 17 different Valderon ships before Kate could shut it off. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Across the Valderon fleet, crew members began reporting symptoms of acute emotional disturbance. Some described feeling strange sensations that they could not identify, unusual urges to make sounds that serve no logical purpose. Medical officers reported a complete breakdown of normal harmonic communication patterns. Among affected personnel, Admiral Zeth Kalar himself had been listening to the transmission when it occurred. For the first time in his 400-year career, he felt something that he could not control or explain. A strange lightness seemed to fill his chest, and he found himself struggling not to produce sounds similar to those he had heard from the humans. "Full quarantine protocols," he ordered, his voice shaking with the effort to maintain control. "All exposed personnel to isolation chambers immediately. Send emergency medical teams from uncontaminated ships." The panic that followed spread throughout. Valderon space faster than any physical disease ever could. Reports flooded in of crew members exhibiting signs of infection after hearing even filtered recordings of the incident. The Emperor himself declared a state of emergency and ordered the immediate evacuation of all border worlds. Dr. Foster watched the chaos unfolding with a mixture of fascination and horror. They're not just afraid of laughter, he realized. They're afraid of joy itself. Their entire civilization is built on the suppression of positive emotions. Captain Murphy stared out at the Valderon fleet, which was now in complete disarray as infected ships were being towed away by uncontaminated vessels. "What have we done?" "We've accidentally shown them something they've forgotten how to do," Dr. Foster replied. "The question is, will they thank us for it or destroy us for it?" As emergency broadcasts began transmitting across 17 star systems, warning of a dangerous psychological contagion spreading from human space, Captain Murphy realized that the simple act of Kate Nelson's snort of amusement might have just started an intergalactic war. But in the isolation chambers of the Valderon ships, something else was happening. The infected crew members were not getting sicker. Instead, they were beginning to remember feelings they had not experienced since childhood, emotions their society had taught them to fear and suppress. And for the first time in thousands of years, some of them were starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, feeling good was not such a terrible thing after all. The news of the Valderon quarantine spread across the galaxy faster than anyone thought possible. Within days, every major civilization had heard about the strange standoff between the mighty Valderon Empire and a small group of human ships. Most alien species watched the situation with great interest, wondering what could possibly make the powerful Valderons so afraid. Ambassador Trellick of the Zephyrian Collective was among the first to take action. The Zephyrians were a loose federation of free-thinking species who had long grown tired of Valderon control over galactic politics. They had watched the Empire's rigid rules and endless ceremonies with barely hidden disgust for centuries. "This is our chance," Trellick told his council as they gathered in their floating city above the gas giant Nephras. "The Valderons are finally showing weakness. We should investigate these humans and see what has them so frightened." The Zephyrian ship arrived at the edge of human space, just as the crisis was reaching its peak. Captain Murphy was surprised to receive a communication request from yet another alien species, but this time the tone was completely different from his encounters with the Valderons. "Greetings, humans," Ambassador Trellick said cheerfully. "We have heard that you possess some kind of weapon that terrifies the Valderons. We are very interested in learning more about this." Dr. Foster stepped forward during the video call. "It's not really a weapon. It's just the way we express happiness. We make a sound called laughter when something amuses us." Ambassador Trellick's face, which looked somewhat like a cross between a lizard and a bird, showed what might have been curiosity. "Show us this laughter. We want to understand what has the Empire so upset." Dr. Foster looked at Captain Murphy, who nodded. "I'll play you a recording of normal human conversation. You'll hear several examples of laughter." As the recording played, Ambassador Trellick listened carefully. When Ben Carter's original chuckle came through the speakers, the alien's head tilted to one side. When the sound of children giggling filled the communication channel, something remarkable happened. Ambassador Trellick began making a sound that was somewhere between a whistle and a chirp. The noise grew louder and more rhythmic and soon other Zephyrians in the background were joining in. Dr. Foster realized with amazement that they were laughing in their own way. "This is wonderful," Ambassador Trellick said when the recording ended. "This laughter creates a feeling of connection and joy. Why would anyone fear such a thing? The Valderons have built their entire society around emotional control," Dr. Foster explained. "They see any spontaneous expression as dangerous chaos." Ambassador Trellick made more of his whistling sounds. "How foolish they are. We Zephyrians have always believed that joy is the highest form of intelligence. We would like to learn more about human laughter and perhaps teach you some of our own expressions of happiness." Within hours, the Zephyrian collective had officially allied themselves with humanity and offered to help mediate the crisis with the Valderons. But more importantly, they began broadcasting human laughter throughout their own territory, encouraging other species to listen and learn. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The Korthik, a warrior species known for their serious nature, began experimenting with something they called battle joy. The peaceful melons discovered that human giggles reminded them of their own children's play sounds. Even the mysterious void dwellers sent cryptic messages suggesting they found human laughter harmonically interesting. Meanwhile, inside Valderon space, a very different kind of change was taking place. In the isolation chambers aboard Admiral Zeth Kalar's flagship, the infected crew members were experiencing something that their medical staff had no training to handle. Commander Talvaris had been one of the first to be exposed to human laughter during the accidental broadcast. For 3 days, he had been confined to a medical chamber while doctors tried to understand what was happening to him. The strange lightness in his chest had not gone away. Instead, it seemed to be growing stronger. "Describe your symptoms again," Dr. Kethmal asked as he examined Talvaris for the 10th time that day. "I feel different," Talvaris said, struggling to find words for sensations that his language had no terms for. "There is a warmth inside me that makes me want to produce harmonics that serve no logical purpose. Sometimes I feel like my entire being wants to vibrate with joy." Dr. Kethmal made notes on his crystal tablet. "These emotional fluctuations are clearly a symptom of the infection. We must find a way to reverse the damage." But Talvaris was not feeling damaged. For the first time in his adult life, he felt truly alive. The rigid control that had been trained into him since childhood was loosening, and underneath it, he was discovering feelings that had been buried for so long he had forgotten they existed. That night, alone in his chamber, Talvaris did something that no Valderon had done in over 1,000 years. He laughed. The sound was different from human laughter, more musical and crystalline, like wind chimes dancing in a gentle breeze. But the feeling behind it was exactly the same, a pure expression of joy that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside him. Unknown to the medical staff, other infected crew members were having similar experiences. Across 17 ships, Valderons were rediscovering emotions they had been taught to suppress. Some were fighting against these new feelings, terrified of losing control. But others, like Talvaris, were beginning to wonder why they had ever wanted to suppress such wonderful sensations in the first place. Dr. Foster, still working frantically to understand Valderon psychology, made a breakthrough when he gained access to their historical databases through diplomatic channels. What he found changed everything. "Captain, you need to see this," he said, calling Captain Murphy to his research station. "I've been studying ancient Valderon texts, and I found something incredible. They used to laugh." The holographic display showed images from Valderon archaeological sites. Ancient artwork depicted Valderon beings in poses that clearly showed joy and celebration. There were carvings of groups making music together, not the formal harmonics of modern Valderon society, but wild, chaotic sounds that looked suspiciously like singing. "Look at this," Dr. Foster said, pointing to a particular carving. This is clearly a Valderon child playing. And this figure here is obviously laughing. Their entire species once knew how to express joy naturally. Amy Thompson, who had been studying the technical aspects of Valderon communication, made another discovery. Their language still contains the neural pathways for emotional expression. It's all still there, just suppressed by centuries of social conditioning. Captain Murphy stared at the ancient images with growing understanding. They didn't lose the ability to laugh. They chose to give it up. And now we've accidentally reminded them what they threw away. The implications were staggering. The Valderon Empire's entire social structure was built on the suppression of natural emotional expression. If their people rediscovered joy and laughter, it would fundamentally change their civilization. Back on the Valderon homeworld, young citizens were beginning to hear rumors about the infected crew members. In the underground networks that existed even in the most controlled societies, word spread quickly about Valderons who had been exposed to something that made them feel emotions they had never experienced before. Group of young rebels who called themselves the Resonant began meeting in secret, trying to understand what was happening to their infected compatriots. They had always felt that something was missing from their perfectly ordered lives, but they had never been able to identify what it was. Silthara, a young crystal being who worked in the Imperial Archives, managed to access some of the medical reports about the infected crew members. What she read fascinated her. The symptoms described sounded not like a disease, but like an awakening. That night, Silthara did something dangerous and forbidden. She accessed the filtered recordings of human laughter that were being studied by Imperial scientists. Even through the dampening filters, the sound touched something deep inside her that had been sleeping for her entire life. For the first time in 3,000 years, a Valderon on the homeworld laughed. The sound echoed through the crystal corridors of the archive building, like a bell announcing the dawn of a new age. Captain Murphy, still trapped at the edge of human space with his convoy, made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Instead of trying to hide humanity's nature or apologize for their laughter, he would embrace it. Open a channel to the entire galaxy, he ordered Lisa Rodriguez. It's time to show everyone what we're really about. Captain Jake Murphy stood on the bridge of the UES Venture, looking out at the massive Valderon fleet that still surrounded human space. Behind him, his crew prepared for what might be the most important broadcast in galactic history. They had decided to stop hiding what made them human and instead share it with the entire galaxy. Are you sure about this, Captain? Lisa Rodriguez asked as she prepared the communication systems. Once we send this signal, there's no taking it back. Jake nodded. The Valderons are afraid of something that brings us joy. Maybe it's time the galaxy decides for itself whether laughter is a weapon or a gift. Dr. Foster had worked for days to compile what he called Earth's greatest comedy hits. The broadcast would include everything from children playing in parks to adults sharing jokes with friends. It would show laughter in all its forms, from quiet chuckles to loud belly laughs. Beginning galaxy-wide transmission, Lisa announced. Signal is reaching 17 star systems and counting. The effect was immediate and beyond anything they had imagined. Across the galaxy, alien species that had been watching the crisis, with curiosity, suddenly found themselves exposed to the full spectrum of human joy and humor. The Korthak warriors, who had been experimenting with battle joy, began roaring with laughter that echoed across their fleet formations. The Melons discovered that human giggles made their children dance with delight. The mysterious void dwellers responded with harmonics. That sounded like cosmic wind chimes, but the most dramatic response came from within Valderon space itself. The infected crew members aboard the fleet ships heard the broadcast through their medical monitoring systems, and the suppressed emotions that had been building inside them finally broke free. Sub-Commander Talvarus was the first. As the sound of human children laughing filled his isolation chamber, he felt something inside him crack open like a flower blooming after a long winter. The crystalline laughter that emerged from him was beautiful beyond description, like music made of pure happiness. Within minutes, his laughter was echoing through the ship's corridors. Other infected crew members heard it and found their own voices joining in. The medical staff, trying desperately to contain what they still thought was a disease, instead found themselves listening to the most beautiful sounds they had ever heard. Admiral Zeth-Kalar was in his command center when the outbreak began. The sound of his own crew laughing reached him through the ship's communication system, and for the first time in 400 years, he felt his careful control begin to slip. "Sir," his aide said nervously, "the infected crew members are all exhibiting the same behavior simultaneously. Should we activate the emergency silence generators?" Admiral Zeth-Kalar stood frozen as he listened to the joyful sounds coming from his own ship. Something deep inside him recognized those sounds, remembered them from a time so long ago it felt like a dream. "No," he said quietly, "let me hear them." On the Valderon homeworld, young Silthara was watching the chaos unfold through the Imperial communication networks. The galaxy-wide broadcast had reached Kethmoran, and despite all the filtering systems, the sound of human laughter was spreading through the planet's information networks. In the crystal caverns beneath the capital city, where the Resonant held their secret meetings, someone had managed to access an unfiltered recording of the broadcast. As the pure sound of human joy filled the cavern, something magical happened. Silthara was the first to laugh, her crystalline voice ringing out like a bell. The sound was so beautiful, so perfect, that the other young Valderons could not help but join in. Soon the entire cavern was filled with the music of rediscovered joy. The sound echoed up through the crystal tunnels and into the city above. Citizens who had lived their entire lives in perfect silence suddenly heard something that called to the deepest parts of their souls. Within hours, laughter was spreading through the capital like wildfire. Emperor Krelthanos was in his private chambers when he first heard the sound. At first, he thought it was some kind of system malfunction, a problem with the city's harmonic regulators. But as he listened more carefully, he realized that the sounds were coming from his own people. "Bring me the recordings of the human weapon," he ordered his guards. The filtered version of Ben Carter's original laugh was brought to him on a secure crystal device. The Emperor had listened to it before during briefings, but always through heavy dampening filters that reduced it to clinical data. This time, driven by curiosity and growing desperation, he ordered the filters removed. The simple sound of a human engineer chuckling at his own clumsiness filled the Emperor's private chamber. For a moment, the ruler of the galaxy's most powerful empire stood perfectly still. Then slowly, something began to change in his ancient crystalline features. Emperor Krelthanos had not felt joy in over 1,000 years. He had trained himself to suppress every natural impulse, to become the perfect embodiment of Valderon order and control. But as he listened to that simple, honest laugh, he remembered something from his own childhood. Before the training and ceremony had taken hold, he remembered being young and playing with light crystals in the palace gardens. He remembered the feeling of pure happiness that had filled him when the colors danced. And for the first time in a millennium, Emperor Krelthanos smiled. The smile led to a chuckle. The chuckle became a laugh. And the laugh became something so beautiful that it shattered the crystal windows of the imperial palace and sent harmonics ringing across the entire planet. When the people of Kethmoran heard their emperor laughing, the last barriers of social control finally collapsed. The planet that had been silent for 3,000 years suddenly erupted in a symphony of joy that could be heard across the star system. Back at the Valderon fleet, Admiral Zeth-Kalar found himself facing a choice that would define the future. of his civilization. His entire fleet was now filled with the sound of laughter, as crew member after crew member rediscovered emotions they had forgotten they possessed. "Admiral," his communication officer called out, her voice shaking with barely controlled mirth. "We're receiving a transmission from the Emperor himself." The image that appeared on the screen showed Emperor Krelphanos as no one had ever seen him before. His crystalline features were bright with joy, his skin showing colors that hadn't been seen in Valderon space for millennia, and he was smiling. "My people," the Emperor said, his voice carrying musical undertones that made everyone who heard it want to smile in return. "We have been living a lie. We convinced ourselves that joy was chaos, that happiness was weakness, that laughter was disease. But these humans have shown us the truth. They have reminded us of what we threw away." Admiral Zethkalar felt his own control finally shatter as he heard his Emperor laugh. The sound that emerged from his throat was like nothing he had ever made before, wild and free and absolutely beautiful. Across the galaxy, other species watched in amazement as the mighty Valderon Empire transformed before their eyes. The rigid formations of the Imperial fleet dissolved into celebration as ship after ship joined in the growing symphony of joy. Captain Murphy, watching from the bridge of the UES Venture, could hardly believe what he was seeing. "Are they dancing?" Amy Thompson asked in wonder, pointing to the Valderon ships that were now moving in graceful, playful patterns instead of military formations. Dr. Foster was crying and laughing at the same time as he watched the transformation. "They're not just laughing," he said. "They're playing. An entire civilization is learning how to play again." The crisis that had threatened to start an intergalactic war ended not with weapons or diplomacy, but with the simple recognition that joy was meant to be shared. The Valderon Empire didn't fall through conquest or rebellion. It transformed through the rediscovery of happiness. Within weeks, the former Valderon worlds had become centers of celebration and creativity. The rigid ceremonies were replaced with festivals of light and sound. The silent halls of power rang with music and laughter. Ben Carter, the engineer whose accidental chuckle had started it all, became the most famous human in galactic history. Though he still insisted he had just been clumsy, statues of him were erected on a dozen worlds as the being who taught the galaxy how to laugh again. 6 months later, the first intergalactic comedy festival was held on Kethmorin. Species from across the galaxy came to share their own forms of humor and joy. Emperor Krelphanos himself served as the master of ceremonies, his crystalline laughter ringing across the stars like the sound of ancient chains finally breaking. Captain Murphy stood on the stage of the great crystal amphitheater, looking out at thousands of beings from hundreds of different worlds, all of them united by the simple act of sharing joy together. "A year ago," he said to the cheering crowd, "we thought first contact would be about sharing technology or forming trade agreements. We never imagined that our greatest gift to the galaxy would be teaching everyone how to laugh together." The sound that rose from the audience was like nothing ever heard before, a harmony of joy that included every form of laughter known to any species. And somewhere in that beautiful chaos, the galaxy found something it had never known it was missing: the sound of universal happiness. The Empire had stood tall for 3,000 years.